The Doobie Brothers defined an entire generation of American rock. But what happened after the music stopped is far more shocking than anyone ever imagined. From thunderous chart domination to bitter internal battles, from a painful split that lasted over 40 years to an emotional reunion that moved millions of fans worldwide. The real story of this legendary band goes far deeper than any radio hit ever revealed. And one chapter of this story ends in a way that absolutely no one saw coming. So stay right here, because by the end, the final piece of this puzzle will completely change how you see them. Let's find out where it all began, how it all fell apart, and why, after more than 4 decades, they finally came back together. In 1970, on the sun-soaked streets of San Jose, California, something quietly extraordinary was taking shape. Tom Johnston and Patrick Simmons, 2 guitarists with wildly different musical instincts, found each other at exactly the right moment in time. Together with drummer John Hartman and bassist Dave Sjogren, they built something that had genuinely never existed before. A band that could blend rock, blues, country, and R&B with seamlessly natural vocal harmonies that felt almost effortless. But in those very early days, no one was watching. Their first audiences weren't record executives in polished suits. They were California bikers, rowdy, unpredictable crowds in dusty bars who demanded music with real grit and real soul. And the Doobies, remarkably, delivered every single night. Then, in 1970, producer Ted Templeman walked into their world, and everything instantly shifted. He heard something in them that others had completely missed. Within months, Warner Brothers Records signed them, and by 1971, their debut album was already out in the world. It was a quietly confident beginning, not yet explosive, but undeniably real. What many people don't fully realize is just how fast things were already accelerating beneath the surface. By 1972, the Real explosion arrived, and it arrived loudly. Toulouse Street announced to the world that the Doobie Brothers were not a small California curiosity. They were something genuinely massive. Listen to the music, swept across FM radio with extraordinary force, pulling listeners in from all across the country. Jesus Is Just Alright followed right behind it, cementing their identity with bold, unapologetic confidence. Then, in 1973, The Captain and Me went double platinum, and the song buried inside it would permanently define them. Long Train Runnin' hit differently. There was a relentless, mechanical groove in that track, something deeply hypnotic, that locked itself into the consciousness of a generation. China Grove arrived alongside it, and together those 2 songs made the Doobie Brothers completely inescapable on every radio dial in America. And just when it seemed like they had already peaked, what were once vices are now habits arrived in 1974 and proved them spectacularly wrong. Black Water rose to the very top of the Billboard charts, their very first #1 single. At that precise moment in the mid-1970s, the Doobie Brothers were unquestionably one of the biggest American rock acts in the entire world. They were selling out venues across the country, dominating FM radio with relentless consistency, and expanding internationally at a pace that genuinely stunned even their closest industry observers. But behind the scenes, things were already quietly beginning to crack. Then everything changed, and it changed in a way that permanently split the band's identity in 2. In 1975, Tom Johnston fell seriously ill. A severe stomach ulcer forced him off the road at the absolute peak of the band's momentum, and in his place stepped a relatively unknown keyboardist and vocalist named Michael McDonald. Nobody, not the band, not the label, not the fans, fully understood yet what was about to happen. McDonald brought something entirely different with him. His voice was warm, deeply soulful, heavily influenced by R&B and Motown in ways that felt almost startlingly foreign against the band's guitar-driven California rock identity. The sound shifted noticeably, and then dramatically, toward polished soft rock and blue-eyed soul. By 1976, taking it to the streets made the transformation official. McDonald wasn't a temporary fill-in anymore. He had become, unmistakably, the new creative center of the band. And in 1978, Minute by Minute made the rest of the world finally understand why. That album reached #1 on the Billboard 200. What a Fool Believes, McDonald's masterpiece of rhythmic sophistication, swept to the top of the singles chart and then claimed multiple Grammy Awards in swift succession. By virtually every commercial measure, the Doobie Brothers had never been bigger, never been more successful, never been more critically celebrated. But here's where things took a very real turn. The original fans, the ones who had followed the band since the biker bar days, who had grown up on Long Train Runnin and China Grove, felt deeply, bitterly lost. This wasn't their band anymore. The twin guitars were gone. The rough California groove had been replaced by something smoother, glossier, more polished. Something that felt to them like a betrayal. And internally, those same tensions were tearing at the fabric of everything. By the late 1970s, the pressure had become absolutely overwhelming. In 1979, Jeff Baxter and John Hartman, two of the band's most vital original voices, walked away. New members joined to fill the gaps, including guitarist John McPhee, but the instability had already taken deep root. The creative direction was fractured. The identity of the band had split cleanly into two irreconcilable halves, the Johnston era and the McDonald era, and no amount of talent or goodwill could bridge that divide. One Step Closer arrived in 1980, and while it performed modestly, the momentum was visibly fading. The fire that had once made the Doobie Brothers unstoppable was now burning low and unsteady. In 1982, after more than a decade of extraordinary music, the band officially disbanded. A farewell tour was documented as a live album, a bittersweet goodbye to something that had once felt genuinely permanent. McDonald moved on to a remarkably successful solo career. Johnston pursued his own path, and the rest of the members scattered into quieter, more private lives. For years, the Doobie Brothers existed only as a memory, though for millions of listeners, it was the most vivid memory in their entire musical lives. What happened next shocked everyone, because it didn't really happen at all. Not fully. Not truly. In 1987, the band reunited for a charity concert, and the immediate electricity of that night proved the connection between them was never entirely gone. Multiple original members returned. The audience response was overwhelming. Almost against their better judgment, a full reunion tour followed. Cycles arrived in 1989, marking their official comeback album and signaling a deliberate return to the Johnston-era rock sound. Tom Johnston was back at the center. The guitars were loud again. The groove had returned. But Michael McDonald was largely absent. And that absence, quiet and persistent throughout the 1990s and deep into the 2000s, kept the wound open. Fans argued endlessly online and in interviews about which era truly defined the band. The Johnston loyalists and the McDonald loyalists faced each other across a divide that seemed, with every passing year, less and less likely to ever close. The band continued touring through the 1990s with real dedication, releasing Brotherhood in 1991. Later albums arrived without the commercial thunder of their peak years, but the Doobie Brothers maintained a remarkable touring presence, playing to loyal crowds who never stopped showing up. McDonald occasionally contributed from a distance. He collaborated here and there, appeared briefly in certain contexts, acknowledged his history with the band with warmth and respect. But a genuine, full reunion felt impossibly far away. For more than 40 years, that divide held firm. And this is where the story becomes something genuinely remarkable. By 2020, the band had quietly sold over 40 million records worldwide. That number alone is extraordinary, but what happened in 2020 was something else entirely. In a moment that moved fans across multiple generations to genuine tears, the Doobie Brothers were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The induction brought together key past members in a way that carried real emotional weight, an acknowledgement long overdue of everything this band had actually meant. And then, after 50 years after the breakup, after the reunions that never quite felt complete, Michael McDonald officially rejoined for the 50th anniversary tour. It was, for thousands of fans who had waited literally their entire adult lives, absolutely electrifying. The reunion lineup brought together Tom Johnston, Patrick Simmons, Michael McDonald, and John McPhee, a gathering of talents that represented every era of the band's extraordinary history. Together, in city after city, they performed songs from across all 5 decades of their work. The divisions that had seemed permanent were, at least in those moments on stage, entirely dissolved. COVID-19 forced the tour into delay, stretching the anticipation even further. But when those shows finally happened, they confirmed something that the fans had always deeply believed. Together, this band was something that could never quite be replaced by any individual version of itself. In 2021, they released Liberté, an album that notably didn't include McDonald. And yet, in 2025, something even more significant arrived. Walk This Road, their first studio album featuring Michael McDonald in over 40 years, finally brought all three primary vocalists back into the same room, working toward the same creative vision. For the first time since the early 1980s, the Doobie Brothers were truly, completely, unreservedly whole. So after 40 years of separation, after decades of creative tension and diverging paths, why now? Why did it finally happen? The honest answer is quietly simple, and perhaps more human than anyone expected. Time, with remarkable patience, did what nothing else could. The creative differences that had seemed catastrophic in 1982 had softened enormously over 4 decades of living, touring, and reflecting. The urgency to be right had gradually given way to something more valuable: the desire to simply be together again. The 50th anniversary provided the occasion, a reason that was bigger than any individual preference, bigger than any lingering grievance. And the fans, who had waited with extraordinary loyalty through every twist and contradiction of this band's history, made unmistakably clear that they wanted to see all of it. Every era, every voice, every chapter, standing on the same stage at the same time. What many people don't fully appreciate is just how rare this kind of reunion actually is. Most bands that fracture this deeply never truly reassemble. The Doobie Brothers did, and they did it with genuine grace, with honesty about their complicated history, and with a commitment to the music that had outlasted everything else. Their story isn't simply about rock and roll. It's about what happens when real people, with real differences and real pride, finally choose legacy over conflict. What started as a late-night jam in San Jose became one of the most layered, complicated, and ultimately triumphant stories in American music history. Some found lasting success. Some faced years of painful uncertainty. Some walked away and wondered, quietly, for decades, if they would ever truly find their way back. Because in the end, the songs were scripted. But everything that held this band together, through every fracture, every silence, every long and difficult year, was entirely, unmistakably real.